At 10:03. Okay, well, we are at the end of Daf Nun Amud Beis, the end, and we've discussed the understanding of Reb Yosef, Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef had the understanding that the whole machlokes, this whole argument of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and the rabbis regarding the Khalil, this musical instrument, the flute, on Shabbos or on Yontiv or not, that whole discussion is really about the regular music that was played in the Beis HaMikdash on a regular basis. However, the music that was played during the Beis HaShoeva, the Simcha, that when they were drawing the water, that was not a regular thing. That drawing of the water ceremony, which was done on the either 7 days of Sukkot or 8 days of Sukkot, or less, as we saw in the different Gemaras we saw Gemaras in Tainus about this, when it was, how many days it was done. But that whole ceremony, that everyone agrees that it doesn't override Shabbos, and it would not be played on Shabbos. That's the way, that's the understanding of Rav Yosef. Now, the Gemara says that Kitanoi, the Gemara that we're up to, the bottom of page Nun Amud Beis. But maybe actually I should just go over maybe the main theme over here of the style. The Gemara, the Rav Yosef's main understanding of this whole discussion is, what is the main music in the Beis HaMikdash? Is it mainly vocals or is it mainly instrumentals? If it's instruments, if it's mainly vocals, then there's a lot of room to say that the instruments are not really so important. And if they're not so important, so we find that maybe we can't learn from the instruments about other klishares, about other holy vessels, because they weren't really so significant. If you learn that, that's not the important thing, the instruments were not the important thing, so then just because we found that one of the instruments was made out of reed, which is like wood, doesn't mean that other instruments would be allowed to be made out of wood. The other discussion that this led to was done in Efsher, Misha'i Efsher. Can we, if a instrument was made out of wood and that's allowed, and that would be considered a kosher instrument, a kosher utensil for holy purposes, even if it's made out of wood, it could be that you can't learn from that to other types of instruments, because other instruments have other alternatives. In the flute, it really needs to be made out of reeds in order to sound good. So that would be a reason to also possibly differentiate between the wooden reed and other holy vessels that are wood. Even if you want to say that the reed was holy and it was considered an instrument, you could still knock that whole idea off to be able to compare it to other vessels. Now, the other thing that the Gemara talked about was about learning from the menorah, and can we say that the menorah would be allowed to be made out of wood based on the wording that the Chumash uses, that Hashem used in the Torah to tell us to make the menorah? Depending on how you want to learn the wording, it's either called a klal uprat or ribuy miyat. Depending on which path you take, you will come out with different conclusions as to using wood for the menorah, which would automatically mean for other vessels as well. So even if we're not going to learn about the reed from the reeds of Moshe Rabbeinu's flute, the flute during Moshe Rabbeinu's time, even if we're not going to learn from that, for various reasons that we can't learn from that, either because you cannot learn from that because that was a necessity. You needed to have wood there. In other cases, you don't have that necessity, and there's other alternatives, so you can't learn from there. Or because maybe Iker Shira is bepeh, and you can't learn from that about anything about a klisharis, about a holy vessel, because that was an instrument. That was not part of the real service. So there's reason to say we can't learn from the reed, but you still might be able to learn from the menorah about wooden vessels. And that had to do with the fact that there's two ways of learning the Torah when there's a riboy and a miut or a klal uprat. Rashi tells us that if you want to boil down these two ways of learning, skip out the last klal, the last riboy, and think about it then. In other words, let's say you just have a klal uprat, or you just have a riboy and miut. And from there, you can then take it to understanding what would happen if you have an additional klal at the end or an additional riboy at the end. What does this mean? Basically, the Torah very often tells us a general rule, and then the Torah sometimes gives like a specific example. I want you to use this. And then sometimes the Torah adds on another general rule, and it doesn't specify. So, of course, the question is, when the Torah gives a specific type of item that it says to use, is it telling you have to use specifically that item? Or is it just giving an example? So if you learn the Torah klal uprat, let's say it only said a general rule, make a menorah, doesn't say what type. Doesn't say wood, metal, gold, silver, copper. It's just make a menorah. Then it says gold, pure gold. And let's say it stopped there. Let's just imagine that it doesn't say anything further. So we've got klal uprat, or you could call it riboy umiut, depending on which path you take. If you follow the klal uprat minhag, or you follow the riboy miut minhag, however your tradition is. Let's say you follow the klal uprat minhag. You follow that tradition, the klal uprat, the general rule and the specifics rule. If you follow that, so what happens is, if the Torah says make a menorah, that would be a general rule. You can make it out of anything. Then it says specifically gold. So if you follow this way, klal uprat, what it means is ein bechlal ela masha b'prat, that the rule of make a menorah is telling you, yeah, and by the way, you know what type of menorah? It has to be gold. That's what the Torah is saying, klal uprat. If you think about it in the other way, which is the riboy miut way, so the Torah is not giving you a general rule and then a specific rule. The Torah is giving you it's saying make a menorah, which is like inclusive. It's adding all types. And then when the Torah says gold, it's limiting that inclusiveness and saying we're saying gold, but we don't mean specifically gold. But don't be so open that it could be anything. It's anything similar to gold. So when you just have these two rules, klal uprat or riboy miut, without the third wording, if you just take these two, it actually, right there, you already see a major difference. Klal uprat means ein bechlal ela masha b'prat, that all you have is what's in that prat, in that specific detail. That's exactly what the Torah wants and nothing else. If you look at it as a riboy miut style, the Torah is sort of excluding, making some exceptions here, but it's not saying that's exactly what I want, nothing else. It's saying it's gold and maybe similar to gold. It's excluding all the things that totally don't fit into that category. That's what it's excluding. Things that are totally out of the category of gold, like wood or maybe plastic or something like that. And so now if we add a third klal or a third riboy, you have the third word. So that third word is now going to be more inclusive and add something. Now, if you learned klal uprat, so all you have now is a gold menorah that's kosher. And then comes a third word that's more general. It's going to add things that are similar to gold. That's what it's going to add. Things that are similar to gold. Oh, metal menorah is kosher. Anything else is not kosher. So can you use wood for holy vessels? No, because our only source would be a menorah, and menorah you can't use any of the wooden. Now, let's say you learn out of the Riboy Miyot way. The Riboy Miyot way was that you have this way of including extra stuff, adding on new stuff, because it's a Riboy. It's a word that it says make a menorah. You could, okay, any type. It's being inclusive of all different types. And then it says Zav Thur, pure gold. Then that means that it has to be similar to gold, something similar to gold. Doesn't have to be specifically gold, but it's a miyot. We're excluding some other stuff. Okay, you can't use wood. Maybe you can't use maybe plastic. You can't use something that has to be similar to gold. But then the Torah then adds a third word. We're going to include teyoseh. You should make it. Make it however you make it. However it's made, it should be made, which is more inclusive. So we're going to say, oh, it's not just things similar to wood, to gold, not just things similar to gold. We have to, we have to include everything, but we have to exclude maybe one thing. Maybe we have to be much more inclusive. Look, we have another word that's including more. So until now, we were going to say maybe only metal, but now we have a third word that's riboy. Now we got to include much more things. So we'll exclude it. There is a miyut, true. There is an exclusion, an exception, a word that shows that we have to exclude something. Let's exclude the least logical thing to make a menorah out of. That the least thought, the least honorable way to have a menorah. What would that be? The least respectable way of a menorah would be like earthenware. That would be the least respectable type of a menorah. So let's exclude that, but we'll include all types of things, even wood. And if you could have wood for a menorah, that would mean that you could have wood for all holy vessels. And that was the way the Gemara concluded here, that there is a way of understanding the discussion of wooden vessels, wooden holy vessels, to say that it's based on learning it from the menorah, from the wording, depending on if you learn it from klal uprat or riboy miyot riboy. Klal uprat klal, riboy miyot riboy.
Rabbi.
Yes.
And the earthenware might be not honorable, but it's not flammable, whereas a wood may be more honorable, but it might catch fire.
I hear you. So if you were around then and you had two options of what you would exclude and say we're not allowed to make it from, are you convinced that you would have given your opinion? In other words, let's say the rabbis were talking, you were one of the rabbis, and they were discussing what should we exclude. We have to exclude one thing from you being usable for a menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. Which one would you have chosen? Would you say, well, we're going to exclude wood, or would you have said let's exclude earthenware?
Wood, because it's
you for sure would have said exclude wood.
Yeah, because it would catch fire. Earthenware is not necessarily going to catch fire.
Well, the rabbis didn't seem to think that way, and they felt that the most biggest concern, I guess they weren't really worried about it catching fire either, but their biggest concern was it would be disrespectful, and that's what the Torah was excluding, and that would have been the earthenware. But I think Mordechai has another thought here. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, doesn't the Rambam in Hilchos Beis Bechira state that if the community is really poor, or they could make kalim even out of tin, and if they get more wealth, they redo the kalim out of more precious metals?
Right, there is. I remember. I don't know if it's maybe it's in Rambam, maybe Gemara that talks about it when they came back from the base when they came back to build the Beis Hamikdash. I think it says they were poor, right? And then they made it. They had the different. That first they made the menorah out of one thing, then they made it out of other things. I don't remember the specific details, but yeah. But anyway, so here we're talking about if it could be made out of wood. And the Gemara seems to understand that if we're going to exclude something, we're going to exclude miyet shel cheres. And as Rashi says on the bottom, "V'zehu haroi lehisma'et." Oh, let's try that again. Rashi says on the bottom line, "V'zehu haroi lehisma'et yoser min hakoil." This would be the most appropriate thing to exclude. Would be the earthenware, type of vessel, and
Rabbi.
The commentaries mention that this would not even be appropriate for a king of flesh and blood. How much more so for a king, Hashem, the king of the universe, and it's the lowest type of material. So if we're going to exclude something, we should exclude this, because how would we exclude something more honorable than this? In other words, if we need to exclude something, it would be the weakest link. It would be the lowest, the worst item, and that would be the earthenware. I think that maybe to answer your question, David, it comes to mind is that it does say kohanim zrizimheim, that the kohanim were always very on top of things and they had a great amount of alacrity, and they were very fast at everything they did, and possibly because they were so they had such they were so fast at everything, maybe we were not concerned that there would have been a fire that would have been dangerous. They would have been so fast to put it out. The kohanim were always reason maybe that was not really a concern, and there was people around. It's not like maybe it would have been left without kohanim to see it. So basically, it was not a concern of fire. The most concern here is that we have to build the menorah out of something respectable, and if we have to exclude something, it would be some type of material that would be the most appropriate to exclude something that's disrespectful. Okay.
Rabbi, question.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Yeah, I'm listening.
In terms of tuma, wood versus kli cheres. Kli cheres, you'd have to destroy because there's no way to tovel it. With wood, what happens with wood?
Well, kli cheres is destroyed. Wood, you could be tovel, but
So
I mean,
would
that be another reason? You say another reason to that we shouldn't use kli cheres because it might have to be it might get destroyed. You might have to destroy it if it gets tummy. I mean, it's a good point. It's definitely good, good thought. I don't know if you have to go that far, but I think it's nice that you came up with that. But I don't think it has to go that far. I think the fact that earthenware is considered the lowliest of vessels, that's what the Gemara says. We have to exclude something. So now let's decide what we should exclude. So if you want to, your way of thinking, Ezra, would be like more getting deeper into it. But just on a surface level, this is the lowest. This is the lowliest type of thing to exclude. Let's just exclude it. Whether let's say it would happen to be that kli cheres was the easiest thing to purify. And let's say wood you have to destroy and metal you have to destroy. I still think the Gemara would assume that we're going to exclude cheres because it's lowly. That would be something that we should exclude from using for the Beis Hamikdash. You know what I mean? In other words, I see it more as a very straightforward type of an idea that something that's disrespectful, that would be something that should be excluded. if we have a long list of things to exclude, that would be on the bottom. That would be, that would be the first thing that would that we should exclude. But yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it's a good point. Something that could be applicable if maybe this was a different type of issue and we were trying to exclude something. Here, I just see it as a sort of like automatic, something that's lowly, we're excluding. But yeah, definitely good thinking. Okay, so now the Gemara says Amarav Papa. We're on the bottom line, page 50b, and the Gemara says Amarav Papa. Rav Papa says, and we turn the page now to the top of page 51a, Kitanoi. This is this general discussion, which we have been discussing now for 3 days, about the main song in the Beis Hamikdash. Was it with vocals or was it with instruments? This seems to be a machlokes Tanoim, a machlokes, an argument of the Tanoim in a Mishnah, the Tanan, that it's because it says in a Mishnah, at least on the side it adds that word Tanan. That the Mishnah says Avdei Koyanim Hayu, that the people who played the music during the sacrifice of the daily offering, the daily burnt offerings, the morning and the afternoon, those people who played the music were Avdei Koyanim Hayu. They were the servants of Koyanim. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. And these were the Avdei Koyanim. Rabbi Meir says that these were the servants of the Koyanim. Rabbi Yosi says Meshpachas Beis Hapgarim, Meshpachas Beis Tzipraya. These were two families that were miyuchasos. They had good lineage. Umei Amoum Hayu, and they were from Amoum. Shahayu Messian Lekahuna, that the Koyanim would marry their daughters. The Koyanim had to be careful who they married. They only married people that were miyuchas, had good lineage. And these two families, these were miyuchasos. They might have been, they weren't Koyanim, they were Israelites, but they were miyuchasos. They had good lineage. And they would be able to marry Koyanim. The Koyanim would marry into their family, their women. And therefore, they were the ones who played the music during the burnt offering. Reb Chanina ben Antignais, during the daily communal burnt offering. Reb Chanina ben Antignais, Reb Chanina, the son of Antignais, argues, and he says, Omer Leviim Hayu, they had to be regular Leviim. So the first opinion was that they were the servants. Second opinion is they were Israelites that were miyuchas, good lineage. And the third opinion is that they were actually Leviim, the people who sang and the people who played the musical instruments. They were both of them. They were the musical instruments were also Leviim. So the Gemara says, "My lav b'haka miflagi." Isn't it that in this is what they are arguing about? Demanda Amar Avadim Hayu. The opinion that says that they were servants, Kosavar holds Iker Shira Bepeh. How would you allow servants of the Koyanim to play these instruments? Servants, they're not Koyanim. They're not Levites. They're not Israelites. They're servants. How do you allow them to play in the Beis Hamikdash? It must be that Iker Shira is Bepeh. The main song is with vocals, and that was done through the Levium. But the musical instruments, that was kosher even if it was done by the servants. And what would the meaning be? Why would that be allowed? Because all they're doing is what's called accompaniment. This is not the main service. They're doing a little bonus. They're doing a little extra music, adding some some extra enjoyable sounds with some background music. Now, that would be the opinion of Reb Meir. Umanda Omar Leviim Hayu. Now, the opinion that says they were Leviim, Kosavar Ikar Shira Bakli. That opinion would hold that. Why does there have to be Leviim? Why couldn't it be Avodim? Why couldn't it be Israelite? Why have to be Leviim? You know why? Because this is the main service, is playing the instruments, and therefore you needed Leviim for that. So it sounds like a very good way of explaining it. Why did why would one rabbi say the Avodim were good, servants were fine, and why did the other one say you need Leviim? The answer is because the question is, what's the Ikar Shira? What's the main service? Is the main service with vocals or the main service with instruments? But the Gemara says, V'tizbara, you really think that's a good shot? Rabbi Yossi, the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, which was that middle ground, Micah Savar, what does he hold? He says they were Israelites that were miyuchas, that had the lineage. Ika Savar, Ika Shira B'peh. If he holds that the main song is with vocals, Afilu Avodim Nami, then he should allow even the servants to play these musical instruments. Why does he need good lineage? And Ika Savar, Ika Shira B'kli, if he holds that the main music is with instruments, then he should hold Leviim in Yisraelim Lai. He should hold that you need Levites, and Israelites are not kosher. And why does he allow Israelites that have good lineage? So this was a good try, Rav Papa, but it doesn't seem to work. So we got to figure out another way of explaining it. Ella de Kuliyalma Iker Shira B'peh. We must say everyone agrees the most important part of music during the ceremony of the bringing the daily communal burnt offering, the main thing was the vocals. However, but here's what they used to argue about. Here's what these rabbis argued about. It wasn't about what's allowed. It's about what happened. Demar Savar Hachi Havamaisa. Umar Savar Hachi Havamaisa. That you have three opinions. Everything is kosher. You want to do Avadim? Servants can do it. You want Yisraelim Yuchasim, lineage Israelites with lineage, they could do it. You want Levium to play the musical instruments, that's allowed. It's all allowed. We all agree. The question is, what happened? What was done? Who normally did it? And this is what the discussion was. Was it done? How was it done? It's allowed to be done by avodim, by servants. But what was the what practically happened? What was the real story? We want to know the history. What was the style? What was the way? What was the tradition, the custom that they did? Now the Gemara asks, okay, that's very nice if you want to write a history book, but lamai nafkamina, why would it be mentioned in a Mishnah about this argument of the rabbis, how it was done? For what purpose? What will come out of this? What halacha will come out of this if we know how it was done? It doesn't really belong in a Mishnah. So the Gemara says, no, there's a difference in halacha. There's a difference. There's going to be something that's applicable to know if we know how it was done. The question is, L'mailen miduchen leyuchsin u'lemaiser kamiflagi. It boils down to taking can we take a lesson from the people? Can we paskin a halacha based on who is playing these musical instruments? Meaning, what does that prove? The fact that these people are there playing musical instruments, does that say something about who they are? Can we assume certain things about them? If they were Levium, then we can assume that these people are real Levites and they would not let someone who wasn't a Levite go, even though it might be allowed. But if that was the tradition that they had, that they always had Levium, that was the style that they always had Levium. So we can assume that these people there are real Levites, and we could give him Meiser. We could give the first tithing to such a person. And if they were Yisrael miyuchasim, if they were Israelites, but they had yichus, and so we have to assume that that they are they're not going to let someone who's not part of that group that's miyuchas, that's either from those cities that are miyuchas. They have the lineage. They show that they have lineage, so they are obviously people with lineage, and because of that, we can assume that Koyanim could marry them, and then and then the other option is that maybe they are just avodim. And if they're avodim, if they're servants, then we can't prove anything about who they really are. And we can't elevate them and say, you people are kosher for this or kosher for that. No, because even avodim would go, and they let anyone there. So the Gemara explained, Man amar avodim, person who says that they were servants that would play music, the musical instruments, kosavar he holds, ein mailen miduchen leyuchsin v'loy lemaiser. You can't assume and say, oh, if they are on the platform, duchen is a platform, can we elevate them for yuchsin and say that they are eligible for kainim to marry them, or for meiser that you can give them meiser? Can we do that? So this opinion holds ein mailen. We don't elevate them from the platform for yuchsin purposes or for meiser purposes. And we can't do that. And because we can't do that, therefore, they would have avodim. Actually, maybe I should word this differently. The proper way to word this is it actually starts at the other end, meaning because he holds you can't assume anything from the platform, therefore they would have avodim there because they could care less if there were avodim, if there were servants there. It wouldn't make any difference because we're not going to be making any assumptions, because we don't take someone just because they're on the platform. We're not going to take them for any other purpose, and therefore we let anyone there, because being there doesn't prove anything about them, about their yichus, and about their level, their type of what tribe they're from. It doesn't prove anything about them, and therefore, yeah, let avodim go. We're going to let avodim. We're going to let servants go. There's nothing to worry when nothing wrong is going to come out of this. You know, it's like some Jewish organizations. They're very nervous, and schools have this problem often. A Jewish school, let's say you have a family that's not 100% Jewish. The father's Jewish, the mother's not Jewish. And they want to send their kids to a Jewish school. Or let's say you have adopted kids and they want to come to a Jewish problem. They'll say, well, if we accept you in our school, people are going to say that they must be Jewish. They must be Jewish. Then they're going to marry their children. They're going to, in other words, it's going to lead to complications later on that we're going to have non-Jewish people as members of our synagogue, or non-Jewish people, and you're gonna go show people, look, I paid membership. I have my membership card. My kids went to this school. I have a diploma from this school for my kids. They must be Jewish. Isn't that a good proof? And you go show it to the Rabbanut of Israel. I want to marry an Israeli girl. You're not Jewish? Oh, you don't think I'm Jewish? Well, the school allowed me. Look at my diploma. I went to the Hebrew day school of this city, or I went to the, And so this is exactly what we're dealing with over here, that the fact that I've played music in the Beis Hamikdash, on the platform, on the Duchen, I played music there. So is that a proof? I'm taking Meiser. I want to give me your Meiser. You just finished harvesting your fruits. No, I play. Look at my picture. I play music. I'm a flutist, and I played over there in the Beis Hamikdash, and here's my picture. You see me playing. What?
Flautist, I think the word is.
What? A flautist. Okay.
Flautist. I don't know, but I think so.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, good. So listen, I'm a musician over there in the Beis Hamikdash, and I should be give me the Meiser. I'm a Levi. How else would So this is the question: are we Mila from Duchen to Yuchsin or to Meiser? So if you hold that they were Avodim, what you're really saying is that we let Avodim go there because we're not going to use it as a proof to your lineage. Uman de Amar Yisrael Hayu, the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, it said that they were Yisraelim miyuchasim. They were Israelites that were miyuchas. He holds Kosavar. He holds that Milan miduchen liyuchsin, that you would be able to prove that you must have lineage. And people assume if you're on the duchen that you're a Yisrael miyuchas, and therefore he holds that they were Yisraelim miyuchasim, and people would, and that's the way that was accepted. That if you were there, you must be miyuchas. Otherwise they wouldn't have accepted you. Avaloi l'maiser, but you can't prove that you're a Levi because people wouldn't assume that. Now, Manda Omar, and then the other opinion, who was Reb Chanina ben Antignais, he says Levium hayu, that they were Levium, because he holds that Mailan miduchen bein liyuchs and bein lemaiser, that we do accept that people who are on the platform playing music, we assume that they're miyuchas and they're Levium, and therefore because people are going to assume that they only would have Levium there. Because we're going to be able, because people assume things to the extent that they say you must be a Levi, so we only would let Levium, they would only have Levium there. Now, so that's the understanding of the Gemara of explaining this Mishnah about the people who would play musical instruments in the Beis Hamikdash. And basically, the conclusion of the Gemara was that Ikar Shira is bepeh. The main song was with vocals, and the instruments was not so important. But because we would take people and assume things, saying, "Oh, you play music on the platform, the Beis Hamikdash," it means something. It's people assume things based on that, and because people assume things based on that, it's therefore we have to keep that up. We have to live up to that level of expectation because people are going to assume things, and therefore there were different opinions to what extent. How much does people assume when someone plays music on the base of English? But in truth, really, an Eved could do it. Even a servant could do it. But the question is, what was the common thing? Because it was based on to what extent do we assume that someone's, that someone is miyuchas, they're good lineage, someone is a Levi. Do we assume that you must be a Levi if you always get that? If you always are playing music, that you must be a real Levi. Okay, we'll give you Meiser. And that's what the discussion is. Now comes along a whole new understanding of this Gemara that we spent over a day on, of trying to explain what is the specific case where music is either going to override Shabbos or not override Shabbos. In other words, where is this argument that we talk about the musicals, the instruments that are in the Beis HaMikdash? In what specific case is that talking about that it might not override Shabbos? It's an argument if it overrides Shabbos or not. So before we had the opinion of Rav Yosef, and he said the whole argument is about the regular music that they would play during the time of the Korban Tamid, the daily burnt sacrifices. That's what the argument is. That's where there's an argument. During the water libations, the water drawing ceremony, that music, those instruments, everyone agrees that it does not override Shabbos. But there's an argument about overriding Shabbos. That's about the real music during the time of the Korban, of the actual sacrifice. The water drawing, that was, everyone agrees it doesn't override Shabbos. Now comes along the Gemara and says, no, there's another way of looking at it. Reb Yirmiyah bar Abba says, no, Machloikes is Bashir Shel Sheyeva. The whole argument, Reb Yosi bar Yehuda, the rabbis, they are arguing about the water drawing ceremony. That's where there's a question if it overrides Shabbos. But when it comes to the shear of the Korban, then everyone's going to agree that it overrides Shabbos. And how does the Gemara spell this out? How does Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba explain this? He says the machlekes is shear shel sheyeva. The Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda savar, because Rabbi Yosi holds that simcha yasera nami doiches Shabbos. He says even extra joy is going to override. It's part of the mitzvah, and it overrides Shabbos. Again, it's only a rabbinic prohibition of Shabbos. We're not talking about overriding the regular laws of Shabbos. This is a rabbinic prohibition of playing music. So he says, Simcha Yasera, the joy that's part of this mitzvah of water drawing, and it's only a rabbinic decree against playing music. So it's that mitzvah, the joy of this mitzvah of the water drawing, that is not a problem to do it even on Shabbos, because it overrides Shabbos. The rabbis didn't uphold their decree, and as we've learned before, ein shvus b'migdash, that there are cases where we don't follow the rabbinic decrees in the Beis HaMikdash, and this is the way Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba will explain the opinion of Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda. Rabbanan Stavri Simcha Yasera Ina Deichas Shabbos. The rabbis argue and they say Simcha Yasera, an extra joy, this mitzvah of water drawing is not going to be Deichas Shabbos. Aval Shir Shel Korban. And now Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba clarifies and he says, but however, when it comes to the shear of the Korban, everyone agrees. Everyone agrees this is part of the service, the Doiches HaShabbos, and it's going to override Shabbos. So here, the Gemara takes the argument for Rabbi Yosi bar Yehuda and the Rabbanon, that argument, and it qualifies it to the case of Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the water drawing. That's where the argument is. The Shir Shel Karban, everyone agrees, is Deicha Shabbos. Now comes along the Gemara and says, Meisvei, let's bring a proof against the other view, against the view of Rav Yosef. The Bnei Yeshiva asked the Kasha, it's the question on Rabbi Yosef's way of understanding it. Again, we have two ways of explaining, qualifying the argument about the argument of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda in the rabbis about something about if it doesn't override, if it overrides Shabbos or doesn't override Shabbos. That argument, what is it specifically talking about? So now the Gemara is going to try to prove it based on a brisa. So in order to understand this, you just have to remember that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba and Rav Yosef, both of them are Amoraim. They're trying to explain the Tanoim, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, and the rabbis. They're trying to explain where is this argument of these Tanoim. So now we're going to bring a brisa that's going to clarify that, and it's going to seem to side with one of these ways of learning, which means that the other way of learning is going to be wrong. So we're proving it from a brisa. What's the brisa say? Shir shel shoyeva doiches haShabbos. The brisa says the song of the music of the shoyeva, of the drawing ceremony, water drawing, it's doichet, overrides Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. The rabbis say it's not even doicha yom tov. So here, what's the difference between this and the Mishnah, or this and the previous brisa, I should say, where we started with this whole thing? I should say at the Tosefta was a Tanu Rabbanan on page 50b. We had Tanu Rabbanan towards the top of the page, 7 lines from the top. It had this brisa there. It said the Chalil is Deicha Shabbos, Divrei Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. The rabbis say it's even Yom Tov, it's not Deicha. And here comes the Gemara and says, let's prove it. We have a brisa, and here, what's the difference in this brisa? It also says about the music. It's Deicha Shabbos, Divrei Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. The rabbis say it's not Deicha. So what are we using this? How does this prove us better than the original Tosefta that we were basing everything on? Well, the answer is the original Tosefta, it just said Chalil, but it didn't say which Chalil, which flute. Are we talking about the flute of the Shayeva ceremony, the water drawing ceremony, or is this the flute of the sacrifice during the sacrifice ceremony, daily sacrifices? But here, the Bryce actually says it, that we're talking about the Shir Shel Shayeva. We're talking about the water drawing music. That music. So here, the argument, it says, spells out clearly that we're talking about a specific music. It's called the Shir of the Shayeva. And this is where the argument is. So this proves Rav Yosef wrong. He wanted to say that everyone agrees about the Shir of the Shayeva. He says the argument is in the other case. And here we have a clear brisa that says, no, the argument is here. And this is the same rabbis. It's Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda against the rabbis. This is that same argument. It's just that here in this source, it actually spells out what the case is. We're talking about the Shir of the Shayeva. This is the music of the drawing, the water drawing ceremony. Again, this was that all-nighter. All night they were playing this music. The question is it Deicha Shabbos? Now, so here we have it clearly that this is where the argument is. So the Gemara says, Tiyufta de Rav Yosef. This should prove wrong Rav Yosef. We have a clear brisa. The Gemara says, Tiyufta, yes, it does prove him wrong. That he wanted to say that everyone agrees in this case. It's not true. This is a case where they argue. Now the Gemara says, well, what about the other case, the Karban? What does this tell us about the music during the Karban? They're arguing about a case where the during the water drawing ceremony, that is a case of the argument. If it's doicha Shabbos, if it overrides Shabbos, would you be playing music for this water drawing ceremony on Shabbos or not? That would be a machlokes. The Bryce spells it out that is the case where they're arguing about. The question is, what about for the music of the korban? So on a simple level, you would probably jump to say that, well, that case, everyone must agree that it's doicha Shabbos. The whole argument is only in a case of the drawing water ceremony. But the other case of the korban, during the korban, that is part of the avodah. That's doicha Shabbos, according to everyone. That would be the simple way out. The only thing is that it doesn't spell it out so clearly. The brisa that we brought tells us that they definitely argue in the shayeva, the water drawing ceremony. That is a case where they definitely argue. However, we might be able to push and say, well, maybe they argue in the other case as well, as similar to the water drawing ceremony. Maybe they argue also about the regular korban. Maybe there's the same argument there as well. And if we do that, at least we're not proving Rav Yosef totally wrong. Because Rav Yosef wanted to say the argument is about the regular sacrifice music. That music, he said, there's an argument about. Now, we have a brisa that says they argue about the water drawing ceremony. So if we don't want to prove Rav Yosef wrong totally, we might be able to push in that the argument is in both cases. So Rav Yosef wasn't totally wrong. He wanted to say that the argument is by the regular sacrifice music, and by the water drawing music, that everyone agrees. He's wrong about that. The water drawing music, not everyone agrees. There we see is clearly a machlokes. But about the sacrifice music, maybe maybe it's also a machlokes. It's an argument there as well. And then he's not totally wrong. So the Gemara here says, Lema shir shel b'shir shel sheyeva hu depligi aval b'shir shel korban divrei kol dechos Shabbos. The Gemara says, let's say that the music of the water drawing ceremony, that's where they argue. But the music of the sacrifice, maybe everyone agrees that it's doicha Shabbos, it overrides Shabbos, and they don't argue at all there. And then we'll prove Rav Yosef wrong in both. Let's say it, right? It sounds like that. That would be the simple thing to say. That they argue on the shayeva. That's what it says. It sounds like maybe that they don't argue in the case of the sacrifice, and everyone agrees in the case of the sacrifice that it's doicha Shabbos, it overrides Shabbos, and it'll prove Rav Yosef wrong in both. Then the Gemara says, no, maybe not. Amar lach Rav Yosef might be able to say that maybe they argue in that case also, and they'll push in. He could maybe explain that he's not totally wrong. Maybe they argue there as well. And Bashir Shel the Pligi Bashir Shel Sheyeva, they argue about the song of the water drawing ceremony. Huadin the korban. Maybe they also argue about the korban, and Rabbi Yosef might be able to tell you that he's not totally wrong. Now, Rabbi Yosef isn't the one really talking here. It's really the Gemara saying that we could explain that Rabbi Yosef would say this, that maybe we could push in and say Rabbi Yosef is not total. Maybe Rabbi Yosef could understand it this way, that at least he's not totally wrong. And maybe they could argue in both Shira of the Shayeva, as it says clearly, and maybe they also argue about the korban. So why does the Brisa only mention the Shira, the song of the water drawing ceremony? Because it's really showing you something very unique, very innovative. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is so lenient that even the water drawing ceremony he holds overrides Shabbos, and that's why it mentions that case. But really, you could say that they also argue in the other case. But here was more of a impressive insight that, by the way, Shir Shel Sheyeva, it's Doicha Shabbos, according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. Really? Wow, that's quite impressive. That's you've got a lot of guts, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. Why is it Doicha Shabbos? Only like it's not a major part of the mitzvah. This is like an extra. You're just playing some music. It's going to override Shabbos. Yep, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda has that opinion that it overrides Shabbos. even though it's only a shir shel sheva. What about when it comes to the song of during the time of the korbanos? There, maybe it's also a machlokes Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda and the rabbis, but there we're not so impressed with Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda's opinion. It's not so impressive because there it's a part of the avodah, it's part of the service. Okay, you could say it's doicha Shabbos. Maybe the rabbis argue, but you could still, it's not so surprising to say that it overrides Shabbos. So this is what the Gemara says, that it's possible Rabbi Yosef could maybe fit. His way of understanding the argument is not totally wrong, because it could be that they argue in all cases. The Shayeva music, the water drawing music, and the sacrifice music. Both of them, maybe they argue. The Gemara says, not so simple. V'hakatani zehu chalil shel beis hashoeva she'ena deicha lois the Shabbos lois Yom Tov. The Mishnah said this is the chalil of the beis hashoeva. This is the flute of the water drawing ceremony, that it's not doicha, it doesn't override Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now, what does it mean by saying this is the one of the water drawing, that it's not doicha Shabbos, doesn't override Shabbos, and you can't play it on Shabbos, and that's why sometimes the chalil is only done on 5 days or 6 days, because this is the chalil, and this was on the Mishnah, Zehu achalil of Beis HaShe'eva, that is not doicha Shabbos and Yom Tov. It sounds like that what? Aval the korban doicha, but a korban would be doicha Shabbos and Yom Tov. If it was the chalil of the korban, the flute that was played during the time that they brought the sacrifice, that would override Shabbos and Yom Tov. And the Gemara says, and that's the Mishnah in Mani, and who is that going like? Inema, if you want to say it's Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. If you want to say that this follows Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, who we know Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda was the lenient view, and we just proved in a brisa that Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says the shear of the Shayeva is doicha Shabbos, that the ceremony of the water drawing ceremony music overrides Shabbos. According to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, how many days is the Chalil played on Sukkah? According to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, the Chalil is not 5 or 6. The Chalil is 7 days. The water drawing was 7 days, and the Chalil would be played 7 days. It overrides Shabbos and Yom Tov. So according to Rabbi, you can't say that the Mishnah is following Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda's opinion, because according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Hamar Shir Shel Sheiva Nami Doicha, it's Doicha Shabbos, and you would end up playing the Chalil all 7 days. It doesn't matter what day is Shabbos, if it falls on Shabbos, it doesn't. Elalav Rabbanon Utiyufted Rabbi Yossi Betarti Tiyufta. Rather, this must be the rabbi's opinion. The rabbis say it's not Doicha Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's the water drawing ceremony. But Zehu Chalil of Beis HaShe'eva, that's specifically the flute of the Beis HaShe'eva, excluding the flute of the korban, that would be Doicha Shabbos and Yom Tov, which means that the argument is only on the water drawing ceremony. But in the case of the korban music, that music is definitely overrides Shabbos, and we've proved Rav Yosef wrong in both cases. To Yuvta, this proves him wrong. We're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.